Korea saw its first confirmed case of COVID-19 in January of 2020. The virus spread fast in Korea in the initial stages. In fact, Korea once had the second highest number of cases behind China. So the government declared a national health emergency. Strong quarantine and social distancing measures were put in place. Plus, testing stations were set up all across the nation. When someone tested positive for the coronavirus, there were immediate contact tracing efforts. When someone tested positive for the coronavirus, there were immediate contact tracing. When someone tested positive for the coronavirus, there were immediate contact tracing efforts. When someone tested positive for the coronavirus, there were immediate contact tracing efforts. This was to prevent the virus from spreading further. Thanks to active testing and contact tracing, Korea did not see a massive outbreak throughout the pandemic. The total number of cases is a little over 30 million as of today. That is relatively lower compared to the case numbers in other countries. That is relatively lower compared to the case numbers. That is relatively. That is relatively lower compared to the case numbers in other. That is relatively lower compared to the case numbers in other countries. That is relatively lower compared to the case numbers in other countries. That is relatively lower compared to the case numbers in other countries. That is relatively lower compared to the case numbers in other countries. That is relatively lower compared to the case numbers in other countries. Korea saw its first confirmed case of COVID-19 in January of 2020. The virus spread fast in Korea in the initial stages. In fact, Korea once had the second highest number of cases behind China. So the government declared a national health emergency. Strong quarantine and social distancing measures were put in place. Plus, testing stations were set up all across the nation. Testing stations were set up all across the nation. Testing stations were set up all across the nation. When someone tested positive for the coronavirus, there were immediate contact tracing. When someone tested positive for the coronavirus, there were immediate contact tracing efforts. This was to prevent when someone tested positive for the coronavirus. There were immediate contact tracing efforts. When someone tested positive for the coronavirus, there were immediate contact tracing efforts. When someone tested positive for the coronavirus, there were immediate contact tracing efforts. This was to prevent the virus from spreading further. This was to prevent the virus from spreading further. This was to prevent the virus from spreading further. This was to prevent the virus from spreading further. Thanks to active testing and contact tracing, Korea did not see a massive outbreak throughout the pandemic. The total number of cases is a little over 30 million as of today. The total number of cases is a little over 30 million as of today. That is relatively lower compared to the case numbers in other countries. The total number of cases. Korea saw its first confirmed case of COVID-19 in January of 2020. The virus spread fast in Korea in the initial stages. In fact, Korea once had the second highest number of cases behind China. So the government declared a national health emergency. Strong quarantine and social distancing measures were put in place. Plus, testing stations were set up all across the nation. When someone tested positive for the coronavirus, there were immediate contact tracing efforts. This was to prevent the virus from spreading further. Thanks to active testing and contact tracing, Korea did not see a massive outbreak throughout the pandemic. The total number of cases is a little over 30 million as of today. That is relatively lower compared to the case numbers in other countries. That is relatively lower compared to the cases number in other country. That is relatively lower compared to case numbers in other country. lower compared to case numbers in other country. Korea saw its first confirmed case of the COVID-19 in January of 2020. The virus spread first in Korea, fast in Korea, in the initial stage.
The virus spread fast in Korea in the initial stages. The virus spread fast in Korea in the initial stages. The virus spread fast in Korea in the initial stages.
In fact, Korea once had the second highest number of cases behind China. In fact, Korea once had the second highest number of cases behind China. So the government declared a national health emergency. Strong quarantine and social distance measures were put in place. Plus, testing stations were set up. Distancing measures were put in place. The strong quarantine and social distancing measures were put in place. Plus, testing stations were set up all across the nation. When someone tested positive for the coronavirus, there were immediate contact tracing efforts. This was to prevent the virus from spreading further. Thanks to active testing and contact tracing, Korea did not see a massive outbreak throughout the pandemic. The total number of cases is little over 3 million as of today. That is relatively.
The virus that is relatively lower compared to the case numbers in other countries.
That's relatively lower compared to the case numbers in other countries. That is relatively lower compared to the case numbers in other countries.
That is relatively. Korea saw its first confirmed case of COVID-19 in
January of 2020.
The virus spread first in the initial stages. In fact, the virus spread fast in Korea in the initial stages. The virus spread fast in Korea in the initial stages. The virus spread fast in Korea in the initial stages.
In fact, Korea once had the second highest number of cases behind China. So the government declared a national health emergency.
Strong quarantine and social distancing measures were put in place. Plus, testing stations were set up all across the nation. When someone tested positive for the coronavirus, there were immediate contact tracing efforts. When someone tested positive for the coronavirus, there were immediate contact tracing efforts. When someone tested positive for the coronavirus, there were immediate contact tracing efforts. When someone tested positive for the coronavirus, there were immediate contact tracing efforts. When someone tested positive for the coronavirus, there were immediate contact tracing efforts. This was to prevent when someone tested positive for the coronavirus. There were immediate contact tracing efforts. When someone tested positive for the coronavirus, there were immediate contact tracing efforts. This was when someone tested positive for the coronavirus. There were immediate contact tracing efforts. This was to prevent the virus from spreading further.
This was to prevent the virus from
Thanks to
spreading
active testing
further.
and contact tracing,
Active testing and contact tracing.
Korea did not
Korea
see a
did not
massive
see a massive
outbreak
outbreak
throughout
throughout
the
the pandemic.
Korea did not see a massive outbreak
Massive
throughout the pandemic.
Massive outbreak
The total number of
throughout the
cases is a
pandemic.
little over
Total
30
number of
million
cases
as of
is a
today.
little over 3 million.
That is relatively
as
lower
of
compared
today.
to the case numbers in other countries.
The total number of cases is over it's a little over 3 million as of today. A total number of cases is the total number of cases a little over 3 million as of today. That is relatively lower. That is relatively lower.
That is relatively lower compared.
Relatively lower. That is relatively lower compared to the number to the case numbers in other countries.
However, the pandemic is far from being over in Korea. There are still large clusters of community infections all over the nation. Hundreds of new confirmed cases are still being reported each day. Social distancing measures have been ramped up. Some businesses have been forced to shut down or close early. Social gatherings of 5 or more people have been banned. Mask wearing is mandatory at all public places, including transportation. These measures have been effective in preventing the spread of the virus. However, there has been a high level of quarantine fatigue among people, especially among small business owners. Meanwhile, vaccinations have begun in Korea. However, the pace has not been fast enough. There are simply not enough vaccines to speed up the process. However, the pandemic is far from being over. The pandemic is far from being over in Korea. There are still large clusters of community infections all over the nation. Hundreds of new confirmed cases. Hundreds of new confirmed cases are still being reported each day. Social distancing measures have been ramped up. Some businesses have been forced to shut down or close early. Social gatherings of 5 or more people have been banned. Social gatherings for 5 people or more people have been banned. Mask wearing is mandatory. Mask wearing is mandatory at all
our public place, including transportation. These measures have been effective in preventing the spread of the virus. These measures have been effective in preventing the spread of the virus. However, there has been high level of fatigue, quarantine fatigue among people, especially among small business owners. Meanwhile, vaccinations have begun in Korea. However, the pace has not been fast enough. There are simply not enough vaccines. There are simply not enough vaccines to speed up the process.
However, the pandemic is far from being over in Korea. There are still large clusters of community infections all over the nation. Hundreds of new confirmed cases are still being reported each day. Social distancing measures have been ramped up. Some businesses have been forced to shut down or close early. Social gatherings of 5 or more people have been banned. Mask wearing is mandatory at all public places, including transportation. These measures have been effective in preventing the spread of the virus. However, there has been a high level of quarantine fatigue among people, especially among small business owners. Meanwhile, vaccinations have begun in Korea. However, the pace has not been fast enough. There are simply not enough vaccines to speed up the process. However, the pandemic is far from being over in Korea.
However, the pandemic is far from being over in Korea. There are still large clusters of community infections all over the nation. Hundreds of new confirmed cases are still being reported each day. Social distancing measures have been ramped up. Some businesses have been forced to shut down or close early. Social gatherings of 5 or more people have been banned. Mask wearing is mandatory at all public places, including transportation. These measures have been effective in preventing the spread of the virus. However, there has been a high level of quarantine fatigue among people, especially among small business owners. Meanwhile, vaccinations have begun in Korea. However, the pace has not been fast enough. There are simply not enough vaccines to speed up the process.
Speeding up the process.
However, the pandemic is far from being over in Korea.
However, the pandemic is far from being over in Korea.
However, the pandemic is far from being over in Korea.
The pandemic is far from. However, the pandemic is far from being over in Korea. However, the pandemic is far from being over in Korea. However, the pandemic is far from being over in Korea. However, the pandemic is far from being over in Korea. The pandemic is far from being over in Korea. Far from being over in Korea. The pandemic is far from being over. Is far from being over. The pandemic is far from being over in Korea.
However, the pandemic is far from being over in Korea.
Over in Korea.
There are still large clusters of community infections all over the nation.
Community infections all over the nation.
There are still large clusters of community infections all over the nation. There are still large clusters of community infections all over the nation.
All over the nation.
There are still large clusters of community infections all over the nation.
All over the nation.
There are still large clusters of community infections all over the nation.
Clusters of community.
There are still large clusters of community infections all over the nation.
Community infections.
There are still large clusters of community infections all over the nation. There are still large clusters of community infections all over the nation.
Community infections. Clusters of community infections. There are still large clusters of community infections all over the nation. There are still large clusters. Community infections. Large clusters of community infection. Cluster. Large clusters of community infection. There are still large clusters of community infections all over the nation. There are still large clusters of community infection all over the nation. There are still large clusters of community infections all over the nation. There are still large clusters. There are still large clusters of community infections all over the nation. There are still large clusters of community infections all over the nation. There are still large clusters.
There are still large clusters of community infections all over the nation.
Hundreds of new
confirmed cases are still being reported each day.
Are still being reported each day. Hundreds of new confirmed cases. Hundreds of new confirmed cases are still being reported. The cases are being reported each day. Hundreds of new confirmed cases are still being reported each day. Hundreds of new confirmed cases are still being reported.
Hundreds of new confirmed cases are still being reported each day.
Hundreds of new confirmed cases are still being reported each day. Hundreds of new confirmed cases are still being reported each day. Hundreds of new confirmed cases are still being reported each day. Hundreds of new confirmed cases are still being reported each day. Hundreds of new confirmed cases are still being reported each day. Hundreds of new confirmed cases are still being reported each day. Hundreds of new confirmed cases are still being reported each day. Social distancing measures have been ramped up. ramped up.
Social distancing measures have been ramped up.
Ramped up. Ramped up. Ramped up. Ramped up.
Social distancing measures have been
ramped up. Social distancing measures
Social
have been ramped
distancing
up.
measures have been ramped up.
Social distancing measures
have been ramped up.
measures have been ramped up.
Social distancing measures have been ramped up.
Have been ramped up. Have been ramped up. Social distancing measures have been ramped up. Social distancing measures have been ramped up. Some
businesses have been forced to shut down or close early. Some businesses have been forced to shut down
Some
or close
businesses
early.
have been forced to shut down. Have been forced to shut down. Some businesses have been forced to shut down or close early.
Some businesses have been forced to shut down or close
Forced
early.
to shut down or close early. Some businesses have been forced to shut down or close early. Close early. Some businesses have been forced to shut down or close early. Some businesses have been
forced to shut down
forced
or
to
close
shut
early.
down, forced to shut down, shut down, forced to shut down.
Some businesses have been forced to shut down or
forced to
close
shut
early.
down,
Some businesses have been forced to shut down or
forced
close
shut-
early.
forced shut down, forced shut down. Some businesses have been forced to shut down or close early.
Some businesses have been forced to shut down or close early.
Social gatherings of 5 or more people.
Social gatherings of 5 or more people have been banned.
Social gatherings of five or more people have been banned.
Social gatherings of 5 or more people have been banned.
Have been banned.
Social gatherings of 5 or more people have been banned.
Have been banned. Mask
Mask
wearing
wearing is mandatory at all
mandatory.
public places, including
is
transportation.
mandatory. Mask wearing is mandatory at all public places, including transportation.
Mask
Mask
wearing
wearing
is
is
mandatory at all
mandatory
public
at-
places, including transportation.
At all public
Mask
places.
wearing is mandatory at all public places, including transportation.
At all public places, including transportation.
Mask wearing is mandatory at all public places, including
at all-
transportation.
Wearing mask wearing is mandatory. It's mandatory. Mask wearing is mandatory at all public places. All public places, including transportation. Mask wearing is mandatory at all public places, including transportation. Mask wearing is mandatory at all public places. At all public places. Mask wearing is mandatory at all public places, including transportation. Mask wearing is mandatory at all public places, including transportation.
Mask wearing is mandatory at all public places, including
At
transportation.
all public places, including transportation.
Mask
Mask
wearing
wearing
is
is
mandatory
mandatory.
at all public places,
Mandatory.
including transportation. Mask wearing is mandatory at all public places, including transportation. Mask wearing is mandatory at all public places, including transportation.
At all public places. At all public places, including transportation.
Mask wearing is mandatory at all
Mask
public
wearing
places,
is
including
mandatory At
transportation.
all public places, including transportation.
These measures have been effective in preventing the spread of the virus.
Effective in preventing the spread of the virus. These measures
have been effective in preventing the spread of the virus.
Preventing the spread of the virus. These measures have been effective in preventing the spread of the virus. These measures have been effective in preventing the spread of the virus. These measures have been effective in preventing the spread of the virus. These measures have been effective in preventing the spread of the virus. These measures have been effective in preventing the spread of the virus. These measures have been effective in preventing the spread of the virus. These measures have been effective in preventing the spread of the virus.
These measures have been effective in preventing the spread of the virus.
These measures have been effective in preventing the spread of the virus. These measures have been effective in preventing the spread of the virus.
These measures have been effective in preventing the spread of the virus.
These measures have been effective in preventing the spread of the virus. Effective in preventing the spread of the virus.
These measures have been effective in preventing the spread of the virus.
These measures have been effective in These measures have been effective in preventing the spread of the virus. These measures have been effective in preventing the spread of the virus.
However, there has been a high level of quarantine fatigue among people, especially among small business owners. However, there has been a high level of quarantine fatigue among people, especially among small business owners.
Quarantine fatigue. But there has been high level of quarantine fatigue among people, especially among small business owners. However, there has been high level of quarantine fatigue among people. However, there has been high level of quarantine fatigue among people, especially among small business owners. However, there has been a high level of quarantine fatigue among people, especially among small business owners. However, there has been a high level of the quarantine fatigue However, there has been high level in quarantine fatigue among people, especially among small business owners.
Meanwhile, vaccinations have begun in Korea. However, the pace has not been fast enough. There are simply not enough vaccines to speed up the process.
has not been fast enough. There are simply not enough vaccines to speed up the process. Meanwhile, vaccinations have begun. Vaccinations have begun in Korea. Meanwhile, vaccinations have begun in Korea. However, the pace has not been fast enough. There are not enough vaccines. There are not enough vaccines to speed up the process. Meanwhile, vaccinations have begun in Korea. However, the pace has not been fast enough. Has not been enough. Fast enough. 속도가 The pace has not been fast enough. 충분히 빠르다. Pace has not been fast. There are simply not enough vaccines. There are simply not enough vaccines to speed up the process. Meanwhile, vaccinations have begun in Korea. However, the pace has not been fast enough. There are simply not enough vaccines to speed up the process. Meanwhile, vaccination has begun in Korea. However, the pace has not been fast enough. There are simply not enough vaccines to speed up process. Meanwhile, vaccinations have begun in Korea. However, the pace has not been enough. The pace has not fast enough. The pace has not fast enough. The pace is not fast enough. There are simply not enough vaccines. There are simply not enough vaccines. There are simply not enough vaccines to speed up the process. Meanwhile, vaccinations have begun in Korea. However, the pace has not been fast enough. There are simply not enough vaccines. There are simply not enough vaccines. The pace has not been fast enough. There are simply not enough vaccines to speed up the process.